The earliest known principles of war were documented by Sun Tzu, circa 500 BCE. Machiavelli published his General Rules in 1521. Henry, Duke of Rohan, established his Guides for War in 1644. Marquis de Silva presented his Principles for War in 1778. Henry Lloyd proffered his version of Rules for War in 1781 as well as his Axioms for War in 1781. Then in 1805, Antoine Henry Jomini published his Maxims for War version 1, Didactic Resume, and Maxims for War version 2. Karl von Clausewitz wrote his version in 1812, building on the work of earlier writers. There are no agreed principles of war, not even in the NATO alliance, although many of its members have their own. The principles of war identified by Karl von Clausewitz in his essay Principles of War, and later enlarged in his book on war, have been influential on military thinking in the North Atlantic region. Napoleon Bonaparte. Additionally, since their first appearance in English of the military maxims of Napoleon in 1831, all English translations have relied upon the extremely incomplete French edition of General Bernard published in 1827. This has contributed to the erroneous belief that Napoleon Bonaparte had pioneered the principles of war. Napoleon was a keen follower of famous military generals of the past, who influenced his thoughts greatly. Albeit, the armies of today are based on the organization created by Napoleon for his Grand Army, and it has been used ever since the mid-19th century, due to the influence of the Prussian army. They have become a guide for many military organizations to focus the thinking of military commanders and political leaders toward concepts and methods of successful prosecution of wars and smaller military operations. Although originally concerned with strategy, grand tactics and tactics, due to the changing nature of warfare and military technology. Since the interwar period, the principles are largely applied to the strategic decision-making, and in some cases, to operational mobility of forces. Clausewitz. The initial essay dealt with the tactics of combat, and suggested the following general principles. Discover how we may gain a preponderance of physical forces and material advantages at the decisive point. To calculate moral factors. Make the best use of the few means at our disposal. Never lack calmness and firmness. Without this firm resolution, no great results can be achieved in the most successful war. Always have the choice between the most audacious and the most careful solution. No military leader has ever become great without audacity. Based on the above, Clausewitz went on to suggest principles for tactics, the scale of combat that dominated European warfare at the time: the defense, the offense, the use of troops, the use of terrain. Forces are more effective in a concentric rather than in a parallel attack. Attack concentrically without having decisive superiority in an engagement. Always seek to envelop that part of the enemy against which we direct our main attack. Cut off the enemy from his line of retreat. Clausewitz also included in the essay general principles of strategy by saying that warfare has three main objects: to conquer and destroy the armed power of the enemy, always direct our principal operation against the main body of the enemy army, or at least against an important portion of his forces, to take possession of his material and other sources of strength, and to direct our operations against the places where most of these resources are concentrated, to gain public opinion, won through great victories in the occupation of the enemy's capital, use our entire force with the utmost energy. The decisive point of attack. Never to waste time. Surprise plays a much greater role in tactics than in strategy. Pursuit. Force is concentrated at the main point. An attack on the lines of communication takes effect only very slowly, while victory on the field of battle bears fruit immediately. In strategy, therefore, the side that is surrounded by the enemy is better off than the side which surrounds its opponent, especially with equal or even weaker forces. to cut the enemy's line of retreat. However, strategic envelopment or a turning movement is very effective. Be physically and morally superior. Stores of supplies, on whose preservation operations absolutely depend. The provisioning of troops is a necessary condition of warfare and thus has great influence on the operations. Independent action. Strategic defense. Politically speaking, defensive war is a war which we wage for our independence. Strategic offense. The strategic offensive pursues the aim of the war directly, aiming straight at the destruction of the enemy's forces. 20th century theory. Applied to specific forms of warfare, such as naval warfare. Corbett argued that by maritime strategy we mean the principles which govern a war in which the sea is a substantial factor.